Good afternoon, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, Auto World. I'm Jamie Butters, Executive Editor of Automotive News. Welcome to this Automotive News Congress Conversation live stream from the New York Auto Show at the Jacob Javits Convention Center. We've had a few technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with us, following us to whatever channel needed to be taken. We'll be talking about tariffs, affordability, and shopping trends, plus the new vehicles revealed at the show. This is a new tariff era in America. Though the auto industry has been somewhat shielded so far, the parts tariffs haven't taken effect, and USMCA compliant vehicles are only partially taxed. But the market's reacting. Prices are rising on average. Vehicles are being held at port sometimes rather than facing the import tariffs. Automakers are cutting shifts and scheduling downtime. Then just this week, President Donald Trump suggested that he's looking to help the auto industry with a pause on the auto tariffs, to give manufacturers more time to adjust their sourcing. But just yesterday, Swami Kotagiri, CEO of Magna, told me and the other reporters at the Automotive Press Association that it typically takes 2 years from groundbreaking to the start of production, and that's after you find a site and design the factory and get permitted and all that. So kind of really raises the question of whether any manufacturer is going to be able to, even if they want to, be able to make a significant investment as a result of Trump's tariffs. Maybe that is the aim. Maybe it's some other political objective. But for those in the industry, the disruption is just beginning. The show must go on. Automakers, suppliers, and dealers are all trying to figure out how to keep things going, avoid major missteps, and find a path forward. To help us get a handle on where the industry is as of April 16th, 2025, I'm joined today by several special guests. Stephanie Brinley is Associate Director of AutoIntelligence at S&P Global Mobility. Stephanie?
Hi, thanks for having me back on the show again.
Appreciate you being here. Laura Perrotta is President of NJ Car, which represents auto dealers in New Jersey. Laura, welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. So glad to be here with you today.
Appreciate you sticking with us. And Jennifer Newman is Editor-in-Chief of Cars.com. Hey, Jenny.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Before we get into all the fun, we need to thank our sponsor, Cars Commerce. Much appreciated for that. We're going to have a great conversation today, and we want you in the audience to be a part of it. Say hi in the chat. Tell us where you are. It's always fun to see the breadth of our audience around the world. Even better, if you have a question, put that in the chat, and we'll do our best to get you an answer. So to start us off, Stephanie, where do we stand with these tariffs? What do we know, and what's still up in the air?
What do we know is that on May 3rd, we are supposed to have the auto parts tariff start to apply there. The 25% on all imported cars is there. There is supposed to be a mechanism for USMCA compliant vehicles to be tariffed at a level minus US content, but I don't think the process is fully resolved on how to do that. So we're actually hearing a little bit of conflicting information about what's happening at the border and how much is actually being applied or not. But what the Federal Register says and what the White House document says is 25% on all U.S. imported vehicles now, and May 3rd on all parts. So we're looking at a huge impact on the industry. We just, at S&P, we just revised our forecast, putting a lot of the stuff in, and we are looking at our new U.S. light vehicle sales forecast for 2025 is 15.4 million units. Earlier in the year, we were looking at 16.1. So we're taking a lot out of 2025 because the tariffs came into play about a quarter into the year. We actually do expect that 2026, the volume will be a bigger hit compared to what we thought before these assumptions were worked in.
So you now are expecting these tariffs to last quite a while. I think at first S&P's general forecast was maybe it would only be a couple of weeks or a month.
We looked at some scenarios to begin with. We looked at what happens if it's only a couple of weeks. We looked at a midterm. We looked at a long term. But at this point, we're really looking at a longer term disruption in the situation because tariffs are going to stick around a little bit longer. We do see opportunity for tariffs to maybe pull back from 25% in 26 and maybe in 27. So we expect there to be a little bit of relief, and maybe it's not as bad as it is today. But of course, there's the only constant about this situation is that it's changed every other day or every other week. So there's a little bit of, we just have to go someplace with that. But it's going to have a major impact on production and sales.
So, so much that seems unknown and uncertain. Laura, what are you hearing from dealers? Are they anxious about future supply and prices, or just loving the rush of shoppers on the coming into the lots now?
Jamie, there's a lot of anxiety, I'd say, right now, just as things are unfolding, and the uncertainty, the day-to-day changes. Everyone's watching every headline. But that being said, they were very happy with how there was an uptick in March, which was good news. Really, really uptick in sales, spilling over into April. Looks like another strong month. Our dealers in New Jersey have roughly 30 to 90 days of inventory on the ground that's tariff free. So if you're interested in buying a new car, now's the time to run out and shop, because beyond that, we just don't know. And a lot of more questions than answers, I would say, unfortunately. But right now, we're staying optimistic that we've weathered a lot of storms in the past. COVID, just the most recent challenge in the pandemic. So we're going to get through this, and we're going to stay positive.
Sounds it's all you can do in a lot of ways, isn't it? So we'll see how that, obviously keep an eye on everything. But Jenny, what are you seeing in the data at Cars Commerce at cars.com?
So what we're seeing as far as new inventory on cars.com is it is up 9% year over year. That's looking at the quarter, and cars are averaging 78 days on lots. So that's good news. Right? But here's the but. But the prices, they're remaining high. The average new car price is $49,000. It's been that number for about 18 months now. I think what we're all going to be watching, of course, is what happens here in the next month, the next quarter, the next year. What do those new car prices start to do? Do we see them increase as we did with COVID when we had supply issues, right? And one other thing, of course, is to talk about that $49,000, again, I just want to emphasize that new car payments, right? Let's talk about how this actually hits your wallet. So the average is $800 a month. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So it used to be $600 a month. That was pre-pandemic. Now we're at $800. What are we looking at in the future? Just as Laura was saying, it's real hard to predict what the future holds. So especially as everything is changing left and right. One other area I think we should talk about is affordable cars, of course. And those are cars, we define them as $30,000 and less. What we have noticed in the cars.com inventory is those affordable vehicles, those new cars, they make up just 14% of cars.com's inventory. That is down from 38% year over year. So we're seeing a big shift there. One other thing to call out is we think about tariffs of those cars, of those affordable cars, nearly 90% of them are made outside of the US. So it's sorry. I'm sorry to come with like it's a lot. That's a lot, but this is what shoppers are facing right now, and I think it's really important, to Laura's point, that this is the time, if you're thinking about buying a car, this is the time to go and buy a car. Not wait, not hem and haw. It's now.
The trend certainly looks like it's going to keep going upward, at least as long as tariffs stay in play.
Absolutely, yes. I'm right. None of us have a crystal ball, but it's certainly all the indications are there.
And I think, and Laura and Jenny, you can both speak to this as well, but I think that for consumers, it's going to be very difficult to figure out where that price increase has to do with tariffs, what it was really made up of. For the most part, tariff costs are not going to show up as a line item on your Monroney. And unless you are looking at like for like today versus the tariff impacted vehicle, you may not know. As a consumer, you will see the price and change. You will see that your money isn't going to go as far as it did before. But to be able to look at it and say this car costs $2,000 more than last month, that's going to be very difficult for consumers to figure out. So I think part of it is, if you are not going to buy something until June or July or August, and there's the expectation that these cars will be impacted, going back to the sort of the basics of buying what you can afford still is the best strategy. the difficult thing is what you can afford might not be the same thing as what you can afford today.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm thinking my mind is spinning. You guys throwing a lot of stuff out. I do wonder, Jenny, you talked about the 90% of the affordable cars with the start with a two in their price, and not 200,000. I'm supposing a lot of those come from Mexico. So at least maybe some of the content might be U.S. Origin.
Sure, a lot of them do, but let's think about vehicles like Chevy's Trax. You know, that's built in South Korea. So I think that you know, Americans are going to be learning a lot about where their vehicles are assembled, where they're coming in from, and I think just as we all are, right there are a lot of assumptions that are made as far as the Detroit automakers and where they're making these vehicles, as well as the foreign automakers and where they're building those vehicles. And what everyone's going to be learning real quick is it can go down to the trim level, and something from one automaker might be built, one state over from you, and something from a American automaker may be built in Canada or Mexico or on the other side of the globe.
Stephanie, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
It's a global. She's absolutely right. We do have the exposure from South Korea for General Motors and Hyundai that is affecting sort of those entry level vehicles or more affordable vehicles, Chevrolet Trax and Buick and Vista. And it's those two products have been doing so well for the last couple of years because they came in with high value, great looks, great style, great technology, and they're going to be at risk at that point.
Going back to the average monthly payment topping $800, Laura, how much does a number like that hang over dealers, in New Jersey or anywhere around the country?
It really does. And that's where having incentives is helpful. If we can keep as many incentives around as long as possible, anything to get people into the showroom and purchasing. But yeah, monthly payments, it all comes down to what can I physically afford each month. It becomes a bigger and bigger chunk of their overall home budget. And people get strained. And it's almost just more about that dollar figure that they walk away with by month versus how long, and we're just seeing longer and longer loan terms, and interest rates are very high. So anything we can do with incentives and, making sure people get in vehicles they can afford. And then we have there's gonna be a ripple effect to the used market, of course. We are going to see higher prices for used vehicles. We have less inventory coming out of COVID and the chip shortage. So we've got a perfect, almost COVID-like storm where we're gonna have higher prices, less inventory down the road, less used inventory, and higher prices on used vehicles. So it's the consumer is going to unfortunately be paying the price here.
Yeah, and more and more consumers shopping in that depleted used pool, right? Because the people who are priced out at $800 a month instead of $700 or $600, they're going to be going to used and competing for the few off-lease vehicles that are out there right now. It really is becoming like a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. And I've heard of a few dealers calling up folks and saying, that Highlander I sold you a few years ago, would you be willing to trade it back into us? So it's already starting to happen where folks are looking at what are the hot vehicles that the customers want, and we've got to figure out how to get them in. So we're seeing the ramifications already.
For sure. Jenny, are you seeing movement in the data, I bet?
Oh, we are. So when we look at used car searches on cars.com, they fell 17% year over year. And the sharpest drop was in the $10,000 to $30,000 range. And that's, of course, where the budget shoppers, the first time buyers, that's where they're starting. Now, what I thought was really interesting about that range is that right now, those vehicles carry an average of 82,000 miles on them, and they are an average age of 7.6 years. Let's compare that to the pandemic. What happened before the pandemic? Normal times, right? So 2019, if we look at those numbers, same price range, $10,000 to $30,000. The average mileage, 53,000. The average age, 4.4 years. So shoppers are coming in We know that they're holding onto their cars for longer and longer amounts of time. Part of that is likely the loan periods, right? But as they're holding onto their cars for longer amounts of time, what they're finding when they come back into the market, they're finding it's not nearly as, it's not what it was, right? It's gotten real tough.
Yeah, and those and the payments on used vehicles, right? It used to be kind of $200 was kind of a sweet spot. Now, I mean, like 400 is sort of the bargain price people
Yeah.
can find.
Yeah, right. And so that just, I think for some shoppers, or they're going to have to, it goes back to that budget conversation. What can I really afford? How is this building into my daily life? And how long is that loan? Which again is 84-month loan. That's a real long loan.
Well, and those used car, as you pointed out, the mileage is much higher at this point than it had been. If we do have May 3rd auto parts impact, you've got a higher payment for a car with more miles, and you've got more expense in maintaining that vehicle than you did before. So it's really kind of tough all the way around. I don't want to say that out loud, but it is. It's really, with our numbers, and you mentioned Magna's conversation yesterday, um, and where he had said that this is the sort of the worse than COVID and the recession and a couple of other things that happened. And when those numbers that I talked about, our sales forecast changing, it is the biggest single drop, the third biggest single drop that we've had in the history of our forecast, behind the recession of 2008, 2009, and behind COVID. I'm not sure which one of those was worse, but this is the biggest drop that we've made at one forecast round, and a long, long time. And so we're seeing that it's a huge impact all the way around.
Yeah, I want to address that, elaborate a little on it. But first, I do want to remind the audience that you've worked so hard to stick with us. If you have any questions, put them in the chat on whatever platform you're on. The team is keeping an eye out there, and we want to help you get as much value out of this time as you can. But yeah, I mean, comparing to the recent crises, right? It's a lot like the global financial crisis, when there was lending really dried up, and that's not so much happening now. But interest rates are high, and everybody's own ability to purchase is depleted. So that sort of has the demand destruction aspects of it. And then we're expecting to see suppliers suddenly struggle or have a dispute maybe with a customer that can very quickly ripple into assembly plant shutdowns that shut down other parts makers that didn't have any problem with their supply. And so that's the part that's so much like the chip shortage following COVID. So it really is it's a hard hit at the demand side, and then a challenging turbulence on the supply side. And so it is and like I said, a lot of it's been mitigated so far because the parts tariffs aren't in yet, and we're still acknowledging some of the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement. So it seems like it could get a lot tougher.
It does seem like it could get tougher, and it's scary that it's at this level right now, and where we go to it next, because production is going to go down as well. That's where I was going with this. Also, we're going to see a change in what's available for consumers. So consumer choice is going to change quite a bit too. If we look at this already, we've got Jaguar Land Rover holding some cars at ports and not bringing them in. I think Mitsubishi said that in the last couple of days. Infiniti QX50 and QX55, they paused U.S. production, or U.S. bound production of that vehicle, and are now looking at what they're going to do with that next. We're going to see more of that happen, and I don't have the crystal ball to say particularly which car is going to be not offered here anymore, but that's going to be one of the challenges. And in some of the cars that are not being offered, and some of the cars where an automaker does say, well, I just am not going to be in that segment anymore. It is not as simple as saying, oh, I'm just going to build it in the United States and then play. The volume and the scales of production and all of those things come into play to figure out if it does really make sense to build it in the US at that volume. Do you need a new plant? Can you put it in someplace else? A very complex environment. And I think part of it will be, we will see, lower choice for a while. a couple of years until the industry kind of figures out how to work through this process again.
Well, and we know the economic theory is if there's less competition, if there's less choice, the prices go up. It's back to your point about, maybe people won't see a tariff line item on their Monroney, but supply and demand is just, it's going to be there, whether it's because of the cost and they're just saying we need to charge you more to cover our costs, or hey, half of our competitors are out of the market, so we're going to raise prices because we can, and we can't sell as many vehicles as we used to, so we need to get more out of everything we sell.
And do you raise the price on something that's not tariffed to help as an automaker, is you're within your own showroom to help deal with something that is tariffed and maybe balance it around? There's going to be a lot of strategies that come through, and each automaker is going to make a decision that really works within their global footprint, within their showroom in the United States, and any number of things that come into play.
Yeah, already we've seen some pretty interesting divergence of strategies. I mean, you listed a lot of the automakers that are constraining their supply, not bringing highly taxed vehicles into the U.S. market. At the same time, right, we've seen Ford and Stellantis actually cut their prices. I mean, they have big inventory, and maybe they don't know how long this tariff thing's going to last, but that's a really risky and interesting strategy. I mean, Hyundai is trying to go, steady as it goes with no change to MSRP and no change to their patterns of vehicles. I asked Jose Munoz just about an hour ago, are you the vehicles that are arriving at the ports now, are you holding them there? Or are you just paying the tariff and sending those along to your dealers? And that's what they're doing. He said, no changes to the plans. And again, seems a little risky, but they want to have inventory, I guess.
There's very little that's not extremely risky in this environment. It's a capital intensive industry that always carries a great level of risk, but right now it's incredibly heightened.
Laura, what are you hearing from the dealers in New Jersey? Are they what do they want to hear from their brands? What do they think of the pricing strategies of the brands, for that they have to then sort of work with or deal with?
I think it's all about open communication right now. The dealers want the manufacturers to be very open and transparent about how they're going to handle all this. And I think the OEMs are doing a great job, the manufacturers, with trying to keep the dealers looped in and confident, and let them know that it's a team effort. So I do think so far I haven't heard complaints. It's been a lot of meetings and conversations, and looking at how each vehicle will be impacted. There's so much analysis that still needs to be done, and what can they shift things to keep the costs down? We don't, I think everyone's trying to sort that out. One other factor that I think is very important that we raise is, on top of the tariffs, we have the electric vehicle mandates in about a dozen states that have adapted the California Air Resources Board mandates for electric vehicle sales, and that was already going to be making major changes to the marketplace for all vehicles, because as we know, electric vehicle prices are higher without the incentives, and so it impacts the entire product mix. So we have a perfect storm in the CARB states that have adopted these regulations. If we don't see relief, in New Jersey, we're doing analysis. If we stay on the course of having to, basically hit 43% electric vehicle sales in model year 2027, and then every year ticking up, we're going to see a massive cut to the vehicles that are being sold in New Jersey, just to balance the scales to make sure that the appropriate electric vehicle targets are being hit. There's going to be less ICE vehicles being allowed to be sold in the state of New Jersey and in New York and these other states. And so when you add that into the mix, and then tariffs on top of that, it's like, how much can the marketplace bear? We need relief. We absolutely need relief on the electric vehicle side, because already there's so much uncertainty with the tariffs on top of that. So it's a very delicate situation right now, and cost and affordability are going to be compromised if we don't get relief on the EV side.
What is the approach in New Jersey on the EV side? Are you trying to get the governor to maybe back away from some of the California commitments? Or are you trying to help, members of Congress get the CARB waiver overturned? What's seen as the best approach?
Multi-pronged right now. Unfortunately, Governor Murphy isn't going to be backing down, it looks like, from the advanced clean cars regulations. We do have a gubernatorial race this year, so we're very hopeful, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republican, that they will see that these targets are impossible to achieve, unfortunately. And it's not that we're anti-EV, it's not that at all. It's just that we need to have common sense and a market-driven approach, because consumers will not allow themselves to be mandated on what they have to buy. So, we're looking at that, hopefully relief in a new gubernatorial administration. And then on top of that, we are hopeful that Congress does pursue repealing through the Congressional Review Act, the CARB waivers, because it's completely unsustainable, the trajectory we're on, and we need relief. And it's just the reality, the consumers aren't there yet. Only roughly, 25% interest in buying an EV right now. And to get to 43% model year 2027 is just an impossibility, no matter what kind of incentives you have, whether they're federal or state. And also New Jersey pulled back on some of our state incentives on top of everything else. And they put an EV fee in place, an EV registration fee, cut the state incentive in half from $4,000 on the hood to $2,000 on the hood. We have a perfect storm of affordability challenges and compromised choice coming at us.
We had a question from the audience. Glenn Stevens asked on Facebook, how rough is this going to be on the EV market, meaning tariffs? Have you looked at how the tariffs hit the EV segment more so or differently than ICE vehicles?
We're still at a top line and haven't dove into that particular thing, but the risk that I see is the import is on any vehicle, regardless of whether it's ICE or BEV. So there is not a distinction at that high level, whether it's ICE or BEV, but BEV is inherently a little bit more expensive. When the parts and components issue comes into play, that can be an issue depending on where that battery is being pulled from. If it's being built in the United States or if it's being imported, then that's a really expensive part to have to tariff. So I think that there are going to end up being some elements where EVs are just more expensive, and that's going to make it harder. And I think we might see, when you get into parts and components, we might see that EVs they might end up being indexing a little bit high just because of the supply chain surrounding them. But in terms of just the bottom line is the tariff is the tariff. It does not matter what the propulsion system is. The reality is it's going to do absolutely nothing for helping make EVs become closer to ICE, and that it's not going to alleviate the fact that the EVs are more expensive.
So when it comes to EVs, what's been interesting is, since the new administration has come into office, we have noticed a marked increase in traffic to a lot of our EV content. And in fact, as I think some of us in the industry know, honestly, the place to get a good deal there for a while was on the leasing side for new EVs. Some of the names that we know. In fact, we're in the Hyundai booth right now. The Ioniq 5 had a really great deal on it. It was incredible, right? We saw some really good incentives. Now those are starting to dry up. But what we're seeing on cars.com is that EVs, they are spending less time on dealer lots than they were previously. We averaged 82 days in Q1, down from 90 days a year ago. So we are seeing, I do wonder if maybe just like shoppers are motivated right now to go buy, if those people who have been toying with the idea of an EV, if perhaps they're moving forward while the incentive, that especially that federal incentive, still is available to them.
Yeah, I think that we're probably seeing a little bit of that too. But and then if you think about an EV buyer being a little bit more of an early adopter, because we are not in the mainstream buyer of EVs yet, so they're doing a little bit more research inherently, and they're most likely aware that there's a risk for those incentives to go away. And I'm sure, yeah, if you were thinking about an EV in September, just go now. There's really no other way to put that, because we don't know exactly when. Talk about the uncertainty in this whole scenario. Yes, the presidential administration has been very clear that they're going to take the incentive away. They've been very clear that they're going to pull back on some of the IRA and the Build Back Better infrastructure support. Yet it hasn't happened. The CARB waiver hasn't been pulled yet. So there's a lot to be done, and the direction was very, very clear, but it hasn't happened. And so you really are left not knowing exactly when it's going to happen.
The other thing I would throw in the mix on the EVs, there are still some new models coming out,
Yes,
which can drive demand. But I think we're almost everybody sees a greater risk of recession in 2025 than we thought 6 months ago or 3 months ago even. And if there is a recession, that's going to make those more expensive EVs harder to sell. So at least that's the theory.
It's the theory. The other half of that is if the automakers can convince owners that they really are lower cost of ownership, there may be an opportunity there to support that. But yeah, there's definitely a risk. Anything expensive is a risk, right? The more that people don't, when your buying power is reduced, then the more expensive it is, the harder it's going to be.
So we're almost out of time. Of course, we got a late start, but we wanted to give you a full show. We're not all the way done yet, though. So if you've got more questions, keep them coming. I want to make sure to let you all know about an important event we have coming up. You won't want to miss the 2025 Automotive News Congress, where you'll hear more great conversations like this one. We have confirmed keynote speakers, including General Motors CEO Mary Barra and Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Yusen Chung. You can buy your tickets at autonewsevents.com. All right, so I think we still have a couple of questions left in the queue. If Steph, Laura, Jenny, can you all stick around even just a little bit longer? Sure. Appreciate all your patience. So we had a question here from the audience. It's a little, I'll just read it. With the tariff increase, will price increases be mandated?
No.
They can just eat the cost, right?
They can just eat the cost. The automakers and the suppliers can do that. But if you think about an EBIT adjusted margin on a business that being, if we're lucky, it's 8%. Mm-hmm. Premiums marks are a little bit higher than that, but and you've got an increase in your cost structure of 25%. Eating it all means no profitability. It's really hard to understand where an automaker is going to be profitable by eating all of that. Yeah. Suppliers are in a much more difficult scenario. They're tighter in margins, and they've been working. They actually had a lot more impact in the last few years in terms of performance and revenue and stuff than automakers did. So they were already tight coming in. It's not mandated. It's hard to understand how some of these companies can be profitable without sharing some of it, and how much they share is really going to come down to each individual company and model lines and trim levels.
Jenny, Laura, anything you want to add on that, or back Steph's answer?
Right. I think all the consumers, that's the question we're getting a lot is, can you tell me exactly how much this vehicle I'm considering is going to go up? And the answer is no. The automakers' plans are clearly nimble. There were industry leaders yesterday speaking about it. Tariffs, of course, were the hot topic, and it was just really interesting to me to hear automaker after automaker acknowledging the difficulty of the situation and how important it was to stay on their toes. Basically, what the plan that VW announced a few weeks ago. What is going to happen April 22nd? Are we going to see a line item, or will they change their mind, right? Well, collectively, and go with another approach, right? As they're starting to see what other automakers are doing. So, unfortunately for consumers, it's going to be something where they're going to really need to stay engaged, just as we all are, to make sure that they're up to date on what is happening with these prices.
Yeah, we thought it was strange to see delivery charges, destination fees go from $300-$400 to $700, $800, $1,000. But if somebody starts putting a $5,000 destination fee on there, we're going to know something's up.
Very true.
We had another question from the audience digging in on the EV question. David asked, is the high depreciation on new EVs, as much as 50% in a couple of years, going to continue, or will that eventually soften out? It just makes buying a new EV that much harder to justify.
Instinctively, it'll even out as we get more and as we get different interests. But honestly, that is not something I track as closely. I see that it exists, but it'll be interesting thing to see how tariffs impact residuals, because It's an artificial price increase. how is that going to translate into residuals when you're paying extra money, but the car in and of itself isn't functionally worth any more than it was, except that it is because you really can't get it at that other price. And so, yeah, the residual research right now is going to be an interesting part of that as well. And that'll play into leasing. How does that affect leasing? Leasing is very, very dependent on what the residual is. And if you don't know what the residual is, or how do you come up with that in a tariff situation when you've got a cost that again is not market driven, that is that is artificial.
Jenny or Laura, anything you want to add on that?
You know, honestly, I would say for shoppers, if you're thinking about an EV, perhaps consider used. You know, that might actually be one of the secrets right now, is that is where you can find perhaps some more affordable vehicles, and fully want to acknowledge that you want to consider, how the heck am I charging this at home? Because really you need to charge it at home to make this convenient and work for you. So there is sort of that extra step, but that's always been part of that EV consideration set. And one thing we have not talked about Tesla, and I'll just drop this nugget and walk away real quick, but what we're noticing on cars.com is prices for used Teslas fell 8% year over year. So, you know, that their lineup it's older, right? They're starting to make changes to the 3 to the Y. But, you know, that's certainly an area to consider. We'll leave it at that.
No, that's an interesting point. I'm glad you brought up Tesla. I was actually going to say, I mean, I do think there's some technological risk, right? If somebody in 4 or 5 years perfects a solid state battery, it might make the lithium ion cars less coveted. But I would want to reassure David, I mean, if you've seen a 50% depreciation, it's because Tesla slashed their prices 2 years ago, right? I mean, taking the Model Y from a $65,000 car to a $45,000 car just devastated everybody's, the value of the car that was sitting in their driveway, especially if it was an EV. So I don't think we'll see that again. I guess something like it could happen one more time in history, but it seems pretty unlikely. That was, they have the biggest player in the segment, slash their prices dramatically worldwide on what's now the highest selling car in the world. It's hard to think we're going to see that again. That would be my hopeful thought. All right.
One thing I'll just add on electric vehicles in the used market, I was talking to some dealers this week, and they were saying that the technology is getting better at testing the life of the battery, going forward as the vehicle comes in on trade, and they think the technology is going to continue to get better. So maybe they'll be able to price those vehicles better into the future. As how long will their useful life be as second and third owners? So I do think maybe those might be positives too. That could be a game changer.
All right. So we should probably wrap this up here pretty soon. I guess we are at an auto show. Has anybody seen any cars? Are there any cars we want to talk about? I mean, we're sitting here at Hyundai. They revealed the new Palisade, which is a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal.
Of course, it's going to be imported from Ulsan. So it's one of the more expensive Hyundais, and it's going to have an extra 10,000 or more in cost.
Stick with the car.
Okay, cars. Very cool car.
It
looks nice.
It looks terrific. It looks terrific, and it's going to have a hybrid this time around. That's right. As well. So we do see the powertrain advancement in that vehicle, which I think it was ready for.
Yeah.
They came to market with Palisade and got the package right first, and with this generation have come back with the powertrain that it needs.
Yeah. Now they're back to having a large vehicle, and they can sell a gas and a hybrid, and they've got the Ioniq 9 to sell an EV, yep. Made in America EV. What about the Subaru?
The Subaru we have with the Solterra took a facelift.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
With Toyota BZ4X as well, and there's a new Subaru coming at the end of the year, and it is the Trail Seeker.
Yes.
It's a little bit bigger than Solterra, so you could almost think of it like Equinox versus Blazer, where the Blazer and the Equinox share a fundamental platform. Mm-hmm. Blazer's a little bit bigger. You can kind of think about it a little bit that way. The Trail Seeker will be produced by Subaru instead of being produced by Toyota as the Solterra is. So it's going to be produced by Subaru, but in a Japanese plant. So again, this is another product that's being imported. But Subaru is heavy on imported product in general, and in their press conference today and their conversation, again, committed to the market, staying there. They didn't necessarily talk about what's going to happen to pricing, but they're certainly committed to remaining here.
Subaru also has the new Outback.
Yep.
That's a pretty big vehicle for them.
That's a pretty big vehicle for them. 30 years since its first introduction. This one gets much beefier, and they didn't talk about the powertrain. I was waiting for the powertrain, but it doesn't come until fall. So apparently, we don't need to know what kind of engine goes into it until then. They didn't get really deep into that.
Okay.
But it looks great. It leans really into the outdoor marketing, the outdoor lifestyle sort of trend that SUVs have right now.
And we know these decisions, these product plans get made years in advance, but it feels very timely, right? As we now have, as you said, we have a president who's not a fan of EVs. And so here we have some big family hauling, probably gas powered, vehicles that are ready to come to market.
We didn't get to Kia yet. So we've got Hyundai
Kia,
Palisade with electrified, and we've got Kia with a couple of products. But actually, I think what we're seeing is a little bit reflective of the fact that to Laura's point earlier, consumers won't be mandated into what they buy, and the reality is that consumers still want a variety of powertrains. There's people still warming up to the idea of EV who haven't put a charger in their home yet, because to Jenny's point, if you don't have a charger at home, it's very difficult to work with. So what we're seeing here is less of that push to go EV over mandates and over regulations, and much more of a reaction and understanding that at the end of the day, the EV transition will be consumer led. And I think we're seeing that in the product lineups that are coming out this year.
Anything you want to add?
I would just point out that what we're also seeing is automakers really diversifying that lineup, right? So not only leaning hard on the EV as perhaps, we're still feeling the effect of that, but acknowledging, yes, let's offer this in a gas version. Let's lean into the hybrid as well, because that was very popular with consumers. We saw a big increase in hybrid purchasing last year. And so, it seems like they're getting the mix right. Now we've got to work through this tariff question, the pricing issues. So next challenge is right in front of us.
Laura, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would just say that I'm excited to be here at the auto show. I always think there's so many great new products that are being introduced, and just getting to get out here and see all the vehicles and the people and the excitement. There's no place I'd rather be. And the greater New York auto dealers put a lot of time and energy into this. And I'm glad to see a lot of our New Jersey dealers here too. So it's a great show. And I think people should go out and buy a car today before all these things hit.
We didn't run out of concepts. We had at least one concept here today too.
Which was that?
Genesis X Grand Equator. X Grand Equator.
Right. It's separate from the so-called concepts that I saw in Seoul a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Which are very production-ready concepts.
Yeah, separate from that. This was a new one.
The new one. Yeah.
And it was interesting. I was at the reveal last night, and it is over next to us on the show floor too. But the Equator name, like you're spelled like equator, so I'm thinking, okay, what does it have to do with this? No, apparently this is a name of an Arabian horse.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, that's kind of a really different, not entirely, but a different way for them to pull that through together. But anyway, off-road oriented EV looks really cool over there, and it's nice to make sure that we have at least one or two concept cars on an auto show floor.
How about that? Concept cars, EVs, hybrids, gas-powered SUV-looking things. We've got a little bit of everything. This is great. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Thanks again to our sponsor, Cars Commerce. Thanks to our Congress Conversations production team, Rudy Shork, Kellen Walker, Tiara Riddick, Terry Kozdrasky, and Tom Carl. Special thank you to our guests, Laura, Jenny, and Steph. Great to have you all here. And thanks, everybody, for watching. It's been great. We'll see you next time.